Good morning, everybody. Hope all is well. Today, we will start writing our first lectures actually via Zoom, and the lectures of week 7 for you. This lecture is titled "The Public Sphere." What is a public sphere, and what about the Habermas idea? Actually, um, if we just try to look for the Habermas idea, we should first highlighting what is the lecture outline. First, we will study together why and what is the public sphere, um, the dichotomy of public sphere and the private one, what is the modern society and the public sphere, what are the structures of public sphere, transitions from public to political spheres, what ought to be and what is in political spheres, does public sphere disappear or not, and how we save the public sphere. I know that it is very code, a long code of ideas. However, I hope we can at least cover the first um, ideas, which is what is the public sphere and why the public sphere is very important. Your repetitive questions about what is the link of the title of our lecture and the course. In other words, why do we study the public sphere and how can we put it into um, within the course? Actually, if we just look at the middle square, which is dealing with the concept of political sociology that mainly focused on the state or who owns the power, we can find out how can we locate the public sphere. If we just looked at the definition of political sociology as we explained it before, we will find out that we focused on the states by highlighting what is the legitimacy and what are the sources of legitimacy. Then we moved to Marxism and the social class struggles. Then we moved to the ideas of Max Weber. Last lectures, we just covered the other square, which is on your left hand, that is dealing with the concept of social movement, the types of resistance to the state domination, the state unfairness, or even the policy, the failure of state policy. So we just focused on the concept of state and what are the powerful states. Then we moved to how to resist the state domination. Today, we suppose to take a step forward towards what's about the people role, what's about the people debate on their common concern, or how people just have a say in politics by focusing on the concept of Hector Mass, which is the public sphere. So to put the public sphere as a concept in our course, we have to know that how we can find a place for people, how people have a say, how people reflect their ideas in the state and the state policy. We can consider the public sphere as a step, another step to resist the state domination or to give people a say in politics. What is a public sphere? Ideal. We can consider the public sphere as an ideal model of democratic, critical public debate. It means, in one word, how people come together in different forms and discuss issues of common concern. So, in other words, public sphere can pave the way for public opinion. Public sphere was formed in the early capitalist period in 18th and 19th centuries, and all of us knew why in 18th and 19th, that is because the impacts of technology at the time, the industrialization, the rationality. So a public sphere was transformed in the modern period in the 20th century. So we are talking about more than one stage for the public sphere that is started in 19th, developed started in 18th, developed in 19th, and transformed in 20th century. Why the public sphere? As I said, that is due to the impact of modernization, the industrialization, the rationality that reformed public opinion and gave people a say in politics and just highlighted their rationality. What is a public sphere? To define also the public sphere, we have to know the division between police and icons, or city and the community of male in Greek city. Actually, the division between police, which is city, and the male society is the oldest form of public private distinction. In other words, in the Greek age, the private and the public were gendered sphere. The head of the family was always male, and women had no real legal or political position. That is why, if I am talking about public sphere, I am talking about male sphere. I am talking about excluding public sphere. So the origin of public sphere, even in Greek age, in Golden Age, started as an excluded public sphere. That is why it was a distinction between public and private. Public was related to male, was related to domination, was related to power, while private was related to women, was related to um, helpless, powerless. So this distinction should be clear into your mind because later it will be elaborated in different terms. Nice to know the difference actually between public and private sphere politically, especially in the Middle Ages. How? In the Middle Ages, we can also talk about a social hierarchy that characterized the Middle Age period. So when we are talking about the king at the top, that this king that followed by the nobility, we are talking about hierarchy. We are talking about king and then nobles. Then we are talking about common people. So also when I'm talking about the distinction between public and private, I'm talking about the king as the symbol of public and common people as a symbol of private. So, in other words, if I'm talking about the distinction between public and private, I'm make a big difference between who is in power and who gets less power. Um, in the modern sense, there is no division between public and private. The king is the only public thing in the kingdom, and people represent non-public sphere. However, we have to know that the representative idea exists, and displaying of status and power was there. The king represents himself to the public, but no discussion taking place. So I'm talking about the distinction between public and private sphere, although I'm saying that the power was related to the public. However, we cannot deny the ideas of representative, the private. Of course, the opposition and the discussion would never be at the time. However, we cannot ignore this big difference between public and private sphere. Um, if I'm talking about the historical background of public sphere, we have to know that the capitalist system pushed for the formation of a new social class. This new social class named bourgeoisie or middle class. So the capitalist system formed a public system of exchange and trade or free liberal market, and that is what Habermas called civil society. So civil society was related to the formation of middle class or the formation of bourgeoisie, and at the same time this new concept, which is the civil society, had what's named the economic base and the economic sphere. So the economic sphere or the concept of capitalism is very important to understand what is the public sphere, because historically it started with the bourgeois, it started with the middle class that led a capitalist system at the time. And within this economic sphere that was characterized by free trade, free market, the state also developed alongside the new kind of business and trade. Its major components, the state major components, were new system of taxation, new system of administration. Why? To control population and to establish a good and strong coercive power. That is why the state developed and the state began to take more and more functions and affected people's life. This is involvement provided the basis for critical debate by people. So we can say the public sphere developed with the social formation, with the middle class, with the bourgeoisie, that actually developed another form of governing, which is state, and this state developed alongside a new kind of business and trade, and had major component to run the economic people affairs through administration, through taxation, to control people and to run their affairs. That is why the state started to affect people's life, and people started to criticize the functions of the state, and these interactions between the state and people elaborated the term of public sphere. So the public sphere gave people the chance to discuss arts, literature, and and coffee houses and salons were popular places for discussing the arts and literature in 18 and 19, especially in England. For example, customers could read newspapers, debate, and hear the last news was so common at the time. So, if we are talking about the social structure of public sphere and how the public sphere started, we can say that the public sphere started as a domain for discussing the innovation parts, the innovation forms, the arts, the literature. But till that time, public sphere was not in touch with the political issues. The quality of debate found actually in coffee in houses that led writers to refer to them as penny universities, and all social classes mixed in these debates. So, in a way or another, all these institutions, such as cafes, such as salons, got a key theme for critical debate about the literature and even the reading material. Even salons were more socially exclusive than coffee houses. French writers, for example, and intellectuals met at their home or in the other homes of the society figures to discuss and to debate. So, in a way or another, the public sphere started as something related to bourgeoisie or the middle class. Public spheres developed the state. Public spheres discussion or debate focused on the literature and arts and was not in touch in politics or with politics. The public sphere is composed by people from the private life to participation or to participate in the public one. What does it mean? It means that the private sphere, oh sorry, the private world, the private domain that includes the family, the economic sphere of trade and market, which is the civil society, family, and the civil society moved from their private domain, private space to public space. What does it mean? It means that the most important element in this moving from their private domain to public domain is in their transition from literally public sphere to the political one. The public formed in coffee houses, in salons, and reading groups shifted to discuss the the political issue. So after a long time with discussing the issues that is related to the literature and the arts, people moved to discuss their political affairs, their political issues. And the question now, do you think that it was just a discussion? It was just um, a random discussion. Actually, the political public sphere is not a just a discussion about politics, but it is so rational discussion about political issues. So one of the most important features when people move from the intellectual public sphere to political public sphere is their rationality in arranging the political issues and their discussing or their discussion over their political affairs. Actually, during this discussion, the ideas, needs, and the needs of the civil society are represented to the public authority. So during this discussion, the public created itself as a powerful force, and this force is public opinion, and this public opinion has a moral authority. So during people discussion, their ideas and their needs should be represented to the public authority. And this authority should be moral to include the demands of people in this discussion, as these demands are based on rational argument. So public opinion can claim what's named the moral authority. What does it mean? It means that when the public sphere moved from intellectual social one to political one, it should be rational. Why it should be rational? Because out of this rationality, this public sphere will produce public opinion, and the public opinion can be considered as moral authority. And moral authority means that how can I let the authority more moderate? How can I assess the actions of authority? How can I redirect and help it in making, shaping or reshaping for the authority decision. So I'm talking about public opinion, moral authority that were elaborated by the public sphere. If also I am talking about a transition from social sphere to public sphere, you have to know that the key agent in transforming the key agent of transforming the literary public sphere into political sphere is press, is journalism. So critical journals began to present their political articles, their political newspapers, their journals articles, and even the significant journals emerged to have a say in politics. When also I'm talking about rational public sphere, I'm talking about the role for women. Women can contribute to the public sphere. However, they cannot express themselves in politics. Why not? Because from the beginning, women were excluded. However, the moral authority was excluded and not applicable by the bourgeoisie. Why? Because women lack the economic qualification. They were not a part of the civil society and were not a part of economic sphere. So in claiming the moral authority to speak for all people, the bourgeoisie actually excluded many groups. So It's a very important point. Why? Because in public, in intellectual public sphere, we can find a place for women. But in political sphere, from the beginning, women were excluded, and even bourgeoisie excluded some sectors from the society. There was no place for women, there was no place for workers. So I'm not talking about a comprehensive political sphere, but I'm talking about excluding specific sectors from the political sphere, and that is, should be considered when we are talking about moving from political sphere, from social sphere to political one. Actually, a crucial contribution of capitalism to the public sphere also was that through free market and the new sense of private property. And that is the most important contribution of capitalism to the public sphere. So capitalism contributed to the public sphere was the codification of civil laws, which should protect private property and the individual or private rights. This meant that the civil society, which was depend on a liberalized free market, was independent from the state and regulate its own laws. What does it mean? It means the civil society was independent from the state. Why it was independent from the state? Because it includes non-state actors. However, it was by regulated by the state law. Um, so when we are talking about the public sphere, we have to know that what ought to be, I mean, how can we describe public sphere as an ideal model, and what is means how public sphere practice was practiced, or how public spheres produce more um, practical implication. Actually, if you look at the public sphere, we can find that public sphere depended on an independent civil society. So public sphere should be from or should come from independent civil society. The civil society should be free from the state, should be free from control or any intervention. The civil society expressed its interest, ideas, and needs in public sphere. So public sphere shouldn't exclude the civil society. And even the bourgeois public sphere reflected critical and rational discussion. So this is the most important three elements of good or rational public sphere. Public sphere should be independent, and sorry, public sphere should depend on independent civil society. The civil society should express its ideas and its interests and its needs in the public sphere, and the bourgeoisie of public sphere should reflect critical and rational discussion. However, however, Habermas argued that the previous socio-economic factors which led to a separation between the state and the society pushed for the emergence of a rational and critical bourgeois public sphere. Habermas confirmed that if we are talking about socio-economic factors, which is related to liberalism, so these socio-economic factors should lead to rational and critical bourgeois public sphere. So he looked at what ought to be in public sphere and it linked with the bourgeois as more functionalized public sphere. While the civil society, in a way or another, doesn't express in fact or what is in public sphere, the civil society doesn't express its interest through the public sphere. But it was such a negotiation of interest between the private bureaucracies, the interest groups, parties, and the public administration. So I'm not talking about the natural expression for the interest through the public sphere, but I'm talking about negotiations between all the elements of civil society and between the elements of civil society and the state, which is not approved in when we are talking about ideal type of public sphere. The functions of the public sphere shifted from rational critical debate to negotiation. So I'm no longer talking about rational critical debate, but I am just talking about part of negotiation between the public sphere and between the public sphere and civil society. The civil society asked the state for social rights, for social services, for social protection. So, in one term, the society asked the state to be involved in conflict eh, between workers, between employees, between. So, I'm not talking about a healthy relationship between the public and the private sphere. I'm not talking about the complementary relations between society and public sphere, but I'm talking about state versus society. And that is the first challenge or the first implication and the gap between what is and what ought to be in public sphere. So I'm talking about a state that began, I'm talking about a state that began to take the economic function of the state, which is the welfare state, and at the same time, I'm talking about the interest of society began to involve themselves in the state, which is the interest groups. So I'm talking about a fusion between state and the civil society, but in conflictual. So instead of talking about the state the state and the civil society or public and private sphere, I'm talking about the two domain versus each other. And that is what is and not what ought to be in the public sphere. After we just explained what is the public sphere and why the public sphere started as an intellectual one and why we moved from the intellectual meaning of public sphere to rational public sphere and what ought to be in public sphere and the three features of ideal public sphere, let's ask very interesting questions. If this gap got wide between what is and what ought to be in public sphere, can we talk now about um, the disappearing of public sphere. In other words, can we say that does the public sphere disappear? Actually, everything changed nowadays. Work changed. People become involved with large corporations. So the talking about self-employment was no longer the norm. At the same time, and after we talked about how people even changed in their type of work, free time, free time as an element was another development. Why? Because rational critical debate, which was one significant feature of the public sphere, was replaced by passive culture of consumption and the involvement of society in non-political and uncritical activities. The consumption of products was related to free time, and rational critical debate died out slowly. So nowadays, you just think about how to occupy or how to spend your free time. You spend your free time, spending your free time was related to the consumption of products. So it was related to irrational critical debate. That is why if the public sphere, according to some scholars, lost what's named rational critical debate, it means in a way or another the public sphere disappeared. And based on these two points, which is that how people change their work and how people change their spending their free time, they said that the public sphere disappeared. Another element or another point they mentioned, which is related to a new set of cultural relations. So they said that people became involved with large people became um, uh, depend on the mass media nowadays and on culture of consumption that was related to how they spend their free time. So modern people, according to Habermas, now watch TV instead of talking about newspaper or in coffee houses. So their code of traditions that was related to rational public sphere was no longer existing. And that is why the public sphere disappeared. So is the general tendency that Habermas identified is for the real public sphere to disappear altogether. The public sphere becomes a setting for the state and the corporate actors to develop legitimacy, not to respond to an independent critical public. So if we are talking about that even public sphere got a part of approving political decision, so we cannot say that we have what's named an independent public sphere. However, by seeking to shape the public opinion in a way that conform to the needs of the system dominated, the state started to include and incorporate the public sphere. And that is why they said that since the public sphere got a part of um, a state, we cannot talk about an effective public sphere. The press. What about the press? especially if we say that the press began as um, a key private institutions in the ideal type of public sphere. Um, Actually, the press, according to Habermas, provoked and transmitted the debate, but never shaped this debate, and it was protected from the state control, and it was privately owned. However, nowadays the press got an unproductive tool. The development of advertising change this situation. Why? Because advertising is the representation of private interest in an attempt to influence the public. It represents the dominance of private interest in the public sphere. In other words, the press also cannot be a productive tool because it was controlled by capitalists, and at the same time it represents the dominance of private interest, not the dominant not represent the public interest in the public sphere. So the press, in a way or another, transferred the public sphere to be private sphere. Um, how can we um, how can we save the public sphere? How can we save it? Is it a way for saving the public sphere after public sphere got unproductive and defunctionalized and was not able to do according to Habermas, according to him? Would you think that is it a way to save the public sphere? After Habermas described the media as an instrument of money and power, some scholars highlighted that the press was conceived as the fourth power and was given the role to check against corruption and excessive power. However, however, according to Habermas, media got an instrument, got a tool for money and power. Uh, but the nation or the concept of critical and rational debate of Habermas itself requires the presence of informed citizens. So how can I describe that the press didn't have what's named a crucial role in the public sphere and claimed that we cannot return and save the public sphere without informed citizens? I think this is the role of mass media, and we cannot abandon or we cannot exempt the mass media from playing this role. So, although that a lot of scholars considered that the press, um, the press didn't perform its role effectively, we can say that we have to reform the press, and we have to urge the elite inside the state to perform the role that was spoiled along ages. Another point that we have to consider when we talked about how to save the public sphere, that is the role of agencies and the bureaucracies. Agencies and the bureaucracies must be internally democratized and subjected to critical debate. So, if the trend for these organizations to become less open to rational critical discourse, this will harm the public sphere. So they should be more and more democratized. Their inner structure must be also organized in a way that permit public rational critical debate. So the agencies, the bureaucracies, the media should also more democratic access as a response to the concentration of ownership and the increasing scale of media organization should be. And at the same time, each trend inside the state should have an access for such democratic media. What about the new media, the new social media? Actually, some scholars consider the new social media as a significant step to develop the concept of public sphere. Sorry, why? Because the social media and the internet, according to their point of view, play a role in creating more democratic spaces. The new media or the new social media supporting the social movement, and this social movement are seeking by nature about political participation and democratization. So in direct way, new medium and the internet will support the social movement, and the social movement will lead the political participation and democratization. Social media as well and the rise of internet pushed, according to some scholars, to redefine or redefinition of the public sphere. How? It creates a new public space for discussion and political participation. So, in both cases, the social media and the internet will redefine the public sphere. How? By being more democratic space and more rational space. How to save the public sphere actually is very complicated and big question. However, we have to know that through social movement, that is the movement of civil rights movement in US, for example, confirmed that the public sphere in 20th century continue to be vital, continue to be essential, not as passive as Habermas saw. Why? Because with the new social media, we can talk about new type of resistance, new type of agency, new type of struggle, and of course, this agency's resistance and the struggle will take more than one form within this public sphere. Um, so to sum up my presentation, you have to know that the most important point that we highlighted in this lecture is the developing of the public sphere concept, the developing of the dichotomy of public and private sphere, how modern society produced the rational public sphere, the public sphere, the able to produce more rational and more critical debate, and at the same time what is the difference between public sphere and the political sphere, what ought to be in political sphere, and why public sphere disappeared, and if is there any chance to save the concept of public sphere with the new social media. I hope that I can cover all the points in so clear way. And as usual, um, if you have any questions, you can email me, or during the time of the lectures, I'll try, I and Sarah um, will be available on Zoom for any questions, for any clarification, and till we return and see each other, inshallah. Thank you so much.